A church and a chair, Arthur asked. Nothing more. And the appointment to be King Mordred's chaplain. I must have that. His sole and personal chaplain, you understand, with an allowance from the treasury sufficient for me to keep my own steward, doorkeeper, cook, and candleman. He brushed grass off his black gown. And a laundress, he added hastily. Is that all? Arthur asked sarcastically. A place on Dumnonia's council, Sansom said, as though it were trivial. That's all. Granted, Arthur said carelessly. So what do we do to get married? While these negotiations were being consummated, I was watching Guinevere. There was a look of triumph on her face, and no wonder, for she was marrying far above her poor father's hopes. Her father, slack-mouthed trembling, was watching in abject terror in case Sansom should refuse to perform the ceremony, while behind Leodegan stood a dumpy wee girl who seemed to be in charge of Guinevere's quartet of leashed deerhounds, and what little baggage the exiled royal family possessed. The dumpy girl, it turned out, was Gwenlliafach, Guinevere's younger sister. There was a brother, too, though he had long since retired to a monastery on the wild coast of Strathclota, where strange Christian hermits competed to grow their hair, starve on berries, and preach salvation to the seals. There was little enough ceremony to the marriage. Arthur and Guinevere stood beneath his banner, while Sansom spread his arms to say some prayers in the Greek tongue. Then Leodegan drew his sword and touched his daughter's back with the blade, before handing the weapon to Arthur as a sign that Guinevere had passed from her father's authority to her husband's. Sansom then scooped some water from the stream and sprinkled it over Arthur and Guinevere, saying that thereby he was cleansing them of sin and receiving them into the family of the Holy Church, that hereby recognized their union as one and indissoluble, sacred before God and dedicated to the procreation of children. Then he stared at each of us guards in turn, and demanded that we declare that we had witnessed the solemn ceremony. We all made the declaration, and Arthur was so happy that he did not hear the reluctance in our voices, though Guinevere did. Nothing escaped Guinevere. "There," Sansom said when the paltry ritual was done. "You're married, lord." Guinevere laughed. Arthur kissed her. She was as tall as he was, maybe a finger's breadth taller, and I confess, as I watched them, that they looked a splendid pair. More than splendid, for Guinevere was truly striking. Cynwyn was beautiful, but Guinevere dulled the sun with her presence. We guards were in shock. There was nothing we could have done to stop this consummation of our lord's madness, but the haste of it seemed as indecent as it was deceitful. Arthur, we knew, was a man of impulse and enthusiasm, but he had taken our breath away by the speed of this decision. Leodegan, though, was jubilant, babbling to his younger daughter how the family finances would now recover, and how, sooner than anyone knew, Arthur's warriors would sweep the Irish usurper Duranach out of Henniswyren. Arthur heard the boast and turned quickly. "I doubt that's possible, father," he said. "Possible? Of course it's possible," Guinevere intervened. "You shall make it my wedding gift, lord. The return of my dear father's kingdom." Agravain spat his disapproval. Guinevere chose to ignore the gesture, and instead walked along the row of guards and gave us each a cowslip from the diadem she had worn in her hair. Then, like criminals fleeing a lord's justice, we hurried south to leave the kingdom of Powys before Gorfethid's retribution followed. Fate, Merlin always said, is inexorable. So much followed from that hurried ceremony in the flower-speckled clearing beside the stream. So many died. There was so much heartache, so much blood, and so many tears, that they would have made a great river. Yet in time, the eddies smoothed, new rivers joined, and the tears went down to the great wide sea, and some people forgot how it ever began. The time of glory did come, yet what might have been never did. And of all those who were hurt by that moment in the sun, Arthur was hurt the most. But on that day he was happy. We hurried home. The news of the marriage rang in Britain like a god's spear clanging against a shield. At first the sound stunned, and in that calm period, while men tried to understand the consequences, an embassy came from Powys. One of that embassy was Valerian, the chief who had been betrothed to Guinevere. He challenged Arthur to a fight, but Arthur refused, and when Valerian tried to draw his sword, we guards had to drive him out of Lindinus. Valerian was a tall, vigorous man with black hair and a black beard, deep-set eyes and a broken nose. His pain was terrible, his anger worse, and his attempt at revenge thwarted. Iorwerth the Druid was chief of Powys's delegation, which had been sent by Keenaglas rather than Gorfythid. Gorfythid was drunk with mead and rage, while his son still hoped there was a chance to retrieve peace from the disaster. The Druid Iorwerth was a grave and sensible man, and he talked long with Arthur. The marriage, the Druid said, was not valid, for it had been conducted by a Christian priest, and the gods of Britain did not recognize the new religion. "Take Guinevere for your lover," Iorwerth urged Arthur, "and Cynwyn for your wife." "Guinevere is my wife!" We all heard Arthur shout that statement. Bishop Bedwin added his support to Iorwerth, but Bedwin could not change Arthur's mind. Not even the prospect of war would change Arthur's mind. Iorwerth raised that possibility, saying that Dumnonia had insulted Powys, and the insult would needs be washed clean with blood if Arthur did not change his mind. Tudric of Gwent had sent Bishop Conrad to plead for peace, begging Arthur to renounce Guinevere and marry Cynwyn, and Conrad even threatened that Tudric might make a separate peace with Powys. "My lord king will not fight against Dumnonia," I heard Conrad reassure Bedwin, as the two bishops paced up and down on the terrace in front of Lindinus's villa. "But nor will he fight for that whore of Hennisweren." "Whore?" Bedwin asked, alarmed and shocked by the word. "Maybe not," Conrad allowed. "But I tell you one thing, my brother. Guinevere's never had a whip taken to her. Never." Bedwin shook his head at such laxity on Leodegan's part. Then the two men walked out of my earshot. Next day, both Bishop Conrad and the Powisian embassy left for their homes, and took no good news with them. But Arthur believed the time of his happiness had come. There would be no war, he insisted, for Gorfythid had already lost one arm and would not risk the other. Keenaglas's good sense, Arthur claimed, would ensure peace. For a time, he said, there would be grudges and mistrust, but it would all pass. He thought his happiness must embrace the world. Labourers were hired to extend and repair Lindinus's villa, to make it into a palace fit for a princess. Arthur sent a messenger to Ban of Benwick, beseeching his former lord to send him masons and plasterers who knew how to restore Roman buildings. He wanted an orchard, a garden, a pool of fish. He wanted a bath with heated water. He wanted a courtyard where harpists would play. Arthur wanted a heaven on earth for his bride, but other men wanted revenge. And that summer we heard that Tudric of Gwent had met with Keenaglas and made a treaty of peace, and part of that treaty was an agreement that Powys's armies could march freely across the Roman roads that crossed Gwent. Those roads led only to Dumnonia. Yet as that summer passed, no attack came. Sagramor held Ael's Saxons at bay, while Arthur spent a summer in love. I was a member of his guard, so I was with him day in and day out. I should have carried a sword, shield, and spear, but as often as not I was burdened with flasks of wine and hampers of food, for Guinevere liked to take her meals in hidden glades and by secret streams, and we spearmen were required to carry silver plate, horn cups, food, and wine to the designated spot. She gathered a company of ladies to be her court, and, so help me, my Lunette was one of them. Lunette had grumbled bitterly at having to abandon her brick house in Corinium, but it took her only a few days to decide that a better future lay with Guinevere. Lunette was beautiful, and Guinevere declared that she would only be surrounded by people and objects that were pretty. And so she and her ladies, dressed in the finest linens, decorated with gold, silver, jet, and amber, and she paid harpists, singers, dancers, and poets to amuse her court. They played games in the woods where they chased each other, hid and paid forfeits if they broke one of the elaborate rules that Guinevere devised. The money for these games, like the money being spent on Lindinis's villa, was provided by Leodegan, who had been appointed the treasurer of Arthur's household. Leodegan swore the money all came from back rents, and maybe Arthur believed his father-in-law, though the rest of us heard dark tales of Mordred's treasury being lightened of gold and filled with Leodegan's worthless promises of repayment. Arthur seemed not to care. That summer was his foretaste of Britain at peace, but for the rest of us it was a fool's heaven. Amhar and Loholt were brought to Lindinis, though their mother Eileen was not summoned. The twins were presented to Guinevere, and Arthur, I think, hoped they would live in the pillared palace that was rising around the heart of the old villa. Guinevere kept the twins company for one day, then said their presence upset her. They were not amusing. They were not pretty, she said, just as her sister, Gwenhwyfach, was not pretty. And if they were not pretty, nor amusing, they had no place in Guinevere's life. Besides, she said, the twins belonged to Arthur's old life, and that was dead. She did not want them, nor did she care that she made that announcement publicly. She touched Arthur's cheek. "If we want children, my prince, we shall make our own." Guinevere always called Arthur a prince. At first Arthur claimed he was no prince, but Guinevere insisted he was Uther's son, and therefore royal. Arthur, to humour her, allowed her to call him by the title, but soon the rest of us were ordered to use it too. Guinevere ordered it, and we obeyed. No one had ever challenged Arthur about Amhar and Loholt and won the argument, but Guinevere did, and so the twins were sent back to their mother in Corinium. The harvest was poor that year, for the crops were blighted by late rain that left them blackened and wilting. Rumour claimed that the Saxon harvest had been better, for the rains had spared their lands, and so Arthur led a warband east beyond Duracobrivis to find and capture their stores of grain. He was happy, I think, to escape the songs and dances of Caer-Cadern, and we were happy that he was at our head again, and that we were carrying spears instead of feasting cloths. It was a successful raid, filling Dumnonia with captured grain, plundered gold, and Saxon slaves. Leodegan, now a member of Dumnonia's council, was given the task of distributing the free grain to every part of the kingdom. But there were horrid rumours that much of it was being sold instead, and that the resultant gold found its way to the new house Leodegan was building across the stream from Guinevere's damp-plastered palace. Madness ends sometimes. The gods decree it, not man. Arthur had been mad for love all summer, and it was a good summer, despite our menial occupations. For a happy Arthur was a beguiling and generous lord. But as autumn swept the land with wind, rain, and golden leaves, he seemed to wake from his summer dream. He was still in love. Indeed, I do not think he was ever out of love with Guinevere,